Hello, I'm Pedro Mora from Pacific Media, from the Pacific coast of Canada. Today, we present The Power of Youth with Tara Matney from Toronto and Gabriel Nadeau Dubois, a spokesperson for the Students' Union of Montreal. After that, we will hear from two more seasoned social justice activists, Rex Weiler and Naomi Klein. They are advocating for the well-being of the Salisk Sea.
So personal story, Bridge asked us to talk about why we got involved in activism, and my turning point, when the light bulb went off for me was, this was about 5 years ago. I'm a middle-class privileged person. I was in Thailand, living there, working as a scuba diver, living an incredible life, carefree. And one day we went out to go for a dive. I was taking these German people out, and the whole cove that we were in was completely red. And at this point I wasn't really politicized at all. I was kind of carefree, and I was like, why is the water red? And they're like, oh, well, because the oceans are warming up, and it's created this extra fungus on the coral that's risen to the top, and it's just created this red cove. And so I was like, okay, well, that's weird. And then so we just went to a different cove, different spot. The next day in the newspaper, I read that it's caused by climate change, and that fungus actually suffocates the coral underneath. And so that sort of hit me, and it was, at the time, the ocean meant a lot to me. I could see the amazing life under there, and the way that the systems interacted and stuff, and it would just blow my mind every day. And then I just started thinking that I couldn't enjoy it anymore. I couldn't enjoy the lifestyle. I couldn't enjoy scuba diving. The ocean became like a sad thing for me. So then I was like, well, what do I do now? So then I went home. I went back to Calgary, where I'm from, and I applied for an internship at the Greenpeace headquarters in Washington, D.C. in their oceans department. And that was like the best thing I could think to do to deal with this newfound consciousness that I had. So that's the first story. The second story is what it sort of inspired the narrative of Gen Y media, which is generational theory. So generational theory is a social sciences theory that I was learning about a couple years ago. Some people believe it, some people don't, but it doesn't really matter. But basically what it says is that generations reoccur in cycles of 4. And every generation is associated with an archetype, and those archetypes also reoccur in cycles of 4. And so the archetype of Generation Y is a hero archetype, and the last hero archetype was the GI generation, who came of age during World War II and the Great Depression. And there's a lot of characteristics of a hero archetype that I won't get into, but the most prevailing characteristic of a hero archetype is that the generation comes of age during a time of social crisis. So during their formative years, like 12 to 30, they basically see society as they know it decay. And so what this does is it creates an opening in the collective consciousness for radical social change. So when I learned about this, I found that to be, whether you believe it or not, or whether you think it's generalist or not, it's an inspiring story, and I chose to believe it, and we based all our work on that idea, on this idea of that this generation is ready to see something new, and they're ready to help build it, and they're ready to work together, and it's just a matter of time until we reach that critical point to where, I mean, it's already happening in my mind. The media doesn't report it, but there's incredible things that are happening where people are building new energy systems and new forms of living and new ways of creating society, which have already sort of been talked about here. So those are the two stories. And so basically, I mean, I guess to kind of bring it all together, what we do is we use media to create this consciousness and to create an alternative voice for our generation, knowing that a lot of the things that are said about our generation are meant to keep us down and keep us feeling bad about ourselves, like we're self-indulgent, self-focused people, and like Bridge said, my experience has been the opposite.
He was the lead spokesperson for CLAS, one of the most militant student unions during the Quebec student strike. Et merci beaucoup.
I will talk not a lot about me. I've always considered myself as a spokesperson and not as a leader. So I think my personal story is not really relevant here tonight. I'll try maybe. I've taken a few notes to maybe explain what was, I think, at the core of the mobilization this spring in Quebec. The first thing I want to be clear on is that for me and for CLAS, the actual conflict that occurred in Quebec in the last months was not a generational conflict. It was not a conflict of generation. It was not a conflict between the young and the old. It's the kind of cliche that the mainstream media love to say, but I don't think it really describes what is the source of the movement that we saw. For us, this movement is not a generational conflict. It's a class conflict. A class conflict. Why? Because underneath this decision of the Liberal government in Quebec to raise tuition fees, there is a try and a strong will to privatize the universities. Why privatize universities? Because capitalism, well, I don't know if it's hopefully or not, because we don't know by what it's going to be replaced, but is dying since the end of this wonderful period of growth that we have seen in the last decades. Growth now in the northern economies is more and is slower and slower. So capitalism needs new markets in order to continue to grow. And public services is that new market that is being commodified to, give electroshock. Do you see that in English? Yeah. Electroshock to this dead body that is already capitalism. So universities and post-secondary education as a place to create new ideas is very interesting for the ruling class, and state in this. And the role of state in this system is to construct those new markets, those new spaces of financial accumulation. And so sometimes we say that neoliberalism is, the end of the intervention of state in society, and that neoliberalism is the fact that state is going out of society and of economy. I think tuition increase and commodification of education and public services is the proof that, in fact, the logic of neoliberalism is the opposite logic. So neoliberalism is not state going out of society, it's state doing more and more and more intervention in society and in the lives of the population in order to create artificially markets in areas that were not commodified before, just like education, just like health, just like a lot of an environment also. So there is this plan, let's say, of the ruling class and of the state and of the politics to really create artificially those new markets, and that is what is beyond the surface of the tuition increase. So that's why I say, that's what we have said in the last month, that was a class conflict, and that our fight was not only a fight to keep accessibility to education, which is obviously very important, and we all agree on that, but also to prevent capitalism from eating the last part of the society who are not yet completely integrated into its logic. So that's a little bit what I wanted to say. Because I think this decision of increasing tuition fees is not only an attack, like I said, to accessibility to education, it is also an attack to the freedom of the young people. Why? Because the first consequence of an increasing of tuition fees is not that on accessibility to education, but then on student debt. And I think we often forget how that is a strong disciplinary process for individuals and for the young and for the youth. So when you create that, in fact, you already put in the head of a young man or woman of 17 years old the idea that education is a commodity, because if you know that going to university will give you a debt of $40,000, well, you will seriously begin to shop your education, and not because you're a villain capitalist, just because if you have this massive debt waiting for you at the end of your education, well, you will want to choose a good university that will bring you a good job. And so when you increase tuition fees, you create debt, and when you create debt, you insert completely the youth into capitalism, and you prepare them already to be obedient consumers and obedient clients and customers for the banks. And I think that's what the Quebec youth felt this spring, is that we were trying to put golden handcuffs on us, saying that we will have very good universities, but we know that the price of that is the loss of our freedom and the loss of democracy. And I think that's why it's the young people who have been like the spark, and who have started who have started this mobilization. Thank you.
And I think a part of our job as people doing organizing is to bring people together so we can talk about hope connected to possibility. Not in an unrealistic way or a naive way, but in ways where people can see their dreams reflected in the visions that we are talking about. Because in our current economic and political reality, we're not allowed to dream unless it's a selfish dream. And we are not allowed to have collective aspirations. We are only allowed to have fear that manifests itself through individual accumulation. That's a fascinating tipping point, I think, that we're at in terms of how do we frame collective dreams in a way that enough of us see ourselves reflected in that we are willing to risk. That we are willing to risk on behalf of our individual, which is what Sean was talking about, for collective gain. And that's the moment that we're in, because of the ecological crises that we're in. So, the other thing that we heard about, and this is a lot of the work that we do at Next Up, and a lot of my work, is around cross-generational organizing. There's a lot of focus in the media on the tensions between the generations, and we've heard those teased out tonight. It's not that we don't talk about the difficult stuff amongst generations, but it's about, in this moment in time, I think we have to think about how we come together as generations to deal with the tough stuff together. Because when we focus on the tensions, I actually think we're fulfilling someone else's agenda. So that we actually we don't think enough about the structural systems that are literally strangling the life out of the planet. And which will demand at some point that we begin to fight each other tangibly for what tiny resources left. And that's not a world I want to spend a lot of time in. So it's not that we ignore the generational challenges, because they're there, but I do think we need to own the generational possibilities and put those forward in a way which will rock a foundation of division from strong unity.